From the creators of Off the Record, one of the most exclusive, invite-only events for revenue leaders, GetAccept is now bringing these conversations and insights on the record. This is the podcast where revenue leaders share their biggest challenges and how they overcame them. And here's your host, Morgan Ingram.
In this episode of the On the Record podcast, we talk about having to do sudden layoffs as a new manager. And so Brian gave us the blueprint on how to navigate the scenario. Now, I hope that none of you are ever in this scenario, but it does happen. So he talked about how he got his team inspired after the layoff, how he continuously made sure to invest into his team, even though the situation looked dire, and ways that he made sure that his team could be successful despite external conditions. So this was a really good way of understanding how to level up your EQ, but more importantly, how to navigate tough times and be successful. We know sales is tough, and he did a fantastic job here. So hopefully y'all enjoy this episode when you tune in, and we'll see you on the other side. Brian, it's good seeing you again, and I have a question for you. And this is gonna put you on the spot. So we're gonna see if what I read is true. So inside of your LinkedIn profile, you say the litmus test for messaging is, can you explain it in one sentence to your mom? So the question becomes, can you explain what your current company does in one sentence?
I'm going to give it a shot. So head of sales at Clazar, and what we help companies do is list, sell, and co-sell on the cloud marketplaces. So that's AWS, GCP, and Azure. So huge market, these companies. There's going to be $50 billion in third-party transactions through those three marketplaces next year. And so Clazar, the best bet to help you get on them and have lots of success. How'd I do? There's probably a run-on sentence, but hopefully that's pretty close.
The last two, we could have modified those for sure, but I think the first you nailed it. So you're the $50 billion man. Is that what you're telling me?
That's we're trying to help our customers get every bit of that $50 billion that we can. That's the plan.
I love it. Well, today we are talking about your biggest challenge you faced as a sales leader, and that's what we do here on this podcast. So we're going to start off with a question we always start off with is, what was your biggest challenge, and walk us through it?
Yeah, so I'll take you back. I started my software career at Oracle, and I was there during the dot-com boom and the dot-com bust. And I became a manager for a group of 13 people, and I was so excited. And I hired this guy who I just knew this guy was going to be amazing. He was looking at other jobs at other companies, and things were starting to get a little fritzy in the economy. And I was like, hey, come to Oracle. It's a safe spot. It's stable. This is where you want to be. So I hire him. 2 weeks in, I just know this guy is fantastic. And so I'm now 6 weeks in as a manager. And my VP calls me in and goes, hey, sorry to do this to you, but tomorrow of the 13 people you have on your team, you've got to lay off 9 of them. And I was just stunned. So I'm going from 13 people down to 4 the next day. And including this guy who I just said, hey, come to Oracle, and he passed up on other job offers. And so I'll tell you, man, that was the absolute hardest thing. I didn't even know how to handle the logistics. Like, do I pull everyone into a room? Do I try? I was like, hey, if I do this one by one, everyone's going to be super nervous and just waiting for their name to be called and stuff like that. And so I ended up kind of like pairing people up and pulling them in. And it was so rough and so brutal. And, the biggest thing is it was hard for me, but it was a lot harder for the 9 people who, just had done nothing wrong and lost their jobs. So that was my single toughest thing.
That's rough. Let's break down a couple of things as you went through that. So you came into a role, you immediately had to fire 9 people. Mentally, how did you go into those conversations? Was it like, hey, I had to, did you have things prepared for them already after, or was it just like, I'm going to do this? Like, what was the mindset here?
There was like There was no training. This was all just such a sudden thing. And so I basically had, like 12 hours to kind of pull myself together. And I just tried to lead with like who I am, which is trying to be just really transparent with people and just saying, hey, this is such an awful situation. And I was really upfront. Like, I didn't know yesterday that this was going to happen. I had no idea. This is not a reflection on you personally, but this is just where we are as a business. And so I think just kind of like that honesty and transparency, it at least softened a little bit. And I think we've seen examples recently on social media of just these very impersonal, almost like informational, like dispatches from like HR, where it's not even the person who hired you letting you go. And so at the very least, my VP had offered, hey, do you want to be there with me? And I just said, no, I've got this on my own, and just did a really direct, really transparent communication with folks.
And in looking back at that now, is there within that challenge and everything that was going on, you also mentioned that you brought someone in as well. How was the reaction to that? How did you respond to people's reaction as they came in one by one?
So I will tell you with that person. So this is the little bit of a bright side of this. That person who I had to let go. One of the things I got very minimal support, but one of the things I had been told was like, hey, if people ask you to be a reference, all we're able to do is verify dates of employment and confirm they're no longer here. And, as I talked to this guy, he was like, hey, I had these other jobs and maybe I can still get one of them, but it's going to be tough for me to explain like why I was only here for a couple of weeks. And I said, hey, Ben, let me just tell you, like, have them be in touch with me. I will tell them that you were phenomenal. And this was totally not because of you. And he ended up getting one of those jobs. And then a couple months later, he was like, hey, just really appreciate how much you helped me out. Let's go out and let's grab a beer. And so I got together with him, and then his roommate joined us, and the three of us became really, really good friends. A few months later, the guy who I'd fired, Greg, he got a job up in Seattle, and he moved there. And at his going away party, his roommate introduced me to my wife that night. So that's the story. Yes. At a karaoke bar in San Francisco, I met my wife at a guy who I fired his going away party.
Wow.
Yep.
What a crazy moment.
So that was the twist. That is
a crazy twist. Okay, so let's transition and twist it over to the remaining 4 people.
Yeah.
How did you deal with the obstacle of them all just not leaving you?
Yeah. Well, I think that the good news was that it was the sort of economy where people weren't looking to leave. And so they're a lot more worried about like, hey, what's going to happen to me next? And so it became one of those things of like, hey, yesterday we had 13, today it's 4. And you were this was hard. Nobody deserved to be let go, but like it's the 5 of us in this together. I think just being really candid with people, like, hey, let's see what we can do to keep everybody's jobs. What can we do? Here's it's born of adversity, but there's an opportunity here because the deals that those 9 other people are working, now there are 4 people who, you've each just kind of tripled your pipeline. Let's see what we can do and sprint through this thing as hard as we can.
Was there any, again, it was in the market they're in, so most people probably aren't looking for other things, but was there any like challenges with those people to bounce back? Well, with maybe obviously some people that they worked with pretty closely now gone, or did you find that everyone rallied around each other to get the job done now that there was only 4?
So I'll tell you another crazy part of this was that at one point it was looking like it was only going to be 3, and I had actually saved 1 person. And so had a really long week and kind of was rallying people. And then I actually, my VP said to me, hey, go ahead, get out of here. It's like 4:30. And I went, and, cell phones weren't quite as ubiquitous and texting and things like that. And so I had set it aside, and I think, just went and kind of relaxed, and found out that employee had actually had delivered to her house separation agreement. Like they accidentally sent it to her. So of the 4 people I saved, one of them actually got a notification saying you're being laid off, and she was trying to contact me. And so didn't find out till the next day. And so then had to repair that damage on top of it. And it almost became comical. And it was just like, hey, it's the 5 of us. Here we are. And I'll tell you, there was a little bit of gallows humor. And I was like, people are like, what are you doing at the end of the fiscal year? And I said, I have absolutely no idea. All I know is like the best thing I can do for all of us is like, let's just focus on everything that we can control and ignore the rest, because there's nothing we can do about it.
There's nothing you can do. Yeah. And worrying about that is only going to make it even worse for you.
Yeah.
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 So, okay, those are all the different challenges that came with that. Mentally, was there anything that threw you off during that time? Before we go into like how you overcame this with the 5 people, and there's probably a good end story to this, but for you, like mentally, how did you go through like, okay, I just got this role, great, but now I have to go fire these people, and now like I'm in a situation that I did not ask to be in.
Yeah. And I think, the one thing I kind of took from it was like, well, I am the one in it. And so what can I do to like make this the best experience possible? Tried to help the 9 people who had to depart, what can I do to help them? And then for the people I kept, trying to, just pull them together, make it as successful as possible, and keep rallying around that. And so it's kind of like, that sometimes things just happen and they fall in our laps, and then we make the decision of what am I going to do with this? And that's what I kept focusing on, was like, what can I do to close business today? What can I do to help my team? How can we sharpen our skills? How can we get better? People are still buying, Oracle was a many billions of dollars company at the time, even having layoffs. Yep. And so just people were still buying, but just not at the same rate. And so let's focus on what we can do. People still need to run their business. How can we make sure that they understand Oracle database is the best option they can make, that, to help build and also, I think it's similar to what we've seen in this environment the last couple of years, that in 2020, 2021, money was cheap. You had 0 interest rates. There's a lot of cash flowing out there. And so people were able to buy from a software technology standpoint. And that's really tightened up these last couple of years. And I think it just becomes a shift. Instead of, hey, we're nice to have, how do I position as like, this is something that's core. You're going to need to be even more efficient. Customers, you need to be even more efficient. How can I help you do that?
Yeah. And so let's go into that. So how did you get the team to be more efficient as a whole, keep their morale up, and hit their goals despite this tragic event that happened?
Yeah. And I think it was, hey, acknowledge it. And obviously the 4 who remained, they had a lot of friends amongst those 9 people. There was a lot of camaraderie, and it was like, hey, this is rough, but like, you're the 4 who are left behind. So let's focus on what's my day to day. And knowing that, I think everyone felt a little bit of an obligation too, that like, hey, I'm lucky I have a spot. There are 9 people who would gladly trade places and still have a job. So let me maximize that. And, I think that there were some logistics involved in who I could keep and who I couldn't keep. But for the most part, it was like, these were people who I really wanted to be there. And so I think they also felt a little bit of a responsibility of like, hey, let's prove this was a good decision. And I put that out there. I said, this was really tough, but you're the 4 who are here with me. And so I'm counting on you, and let's make this the best we can. And so I think it really drew the 5 of us closer because of the circumstances.
And I think that's the part of it as well. In any event, positive, negative, whatever it is, you're going to bond together, right? To be like, okay, we're here. We didn't make this decision, but we are going to move forward in confidence. So could you share, even for the person who accidentally got that, hey, see you later, and I guess you're still part of the team, could you share some stories from that team on how you led them to see success, guide them towards success? What did you see, let's say, in the next 12 months after you made that decision?
Yeah. And so, the people who stayed behind did incredibly well. And like I said, people were still buying. And so it's like, now we just have to be ruthlessly efficient. I can't spend time with people who aren't going to buy. Like my pipe has tripled. And so I got to be more methodical. I got to make sure I'm really clear on next steps. Whereas when it was a third of that, maybe I take a little more time and hey, I'm going to keep going around with this person. I know they haven't made a decision. And, one of the things I learned early in my career is that no is the second best answer in sales. It's those maybes that can really get you. And so we tried our best to eliminate the maybes and get to no or yes, and just spend our time in the most productive way possible.
I love that. And then as the team did what they had to do, accomplish those goals, etc., was there certain routines that you all implemented to get closer as a team, or you just got closer because it was just through the event you were doing?
Yeah, I mean, we started doing, one of the things I did was I had a office, and I had 13 people out at Cubes, and I basically moved out of my office when this all went down, and I was
in the trenches with them.
I was in the trenches, and so it was managing 4 people doesn't take as much time as managing 13 people, right? So I'm there in the trenches, and I'm hopping on calls, and I think like the energy level really went up because we were doing call blitzes, we were doing power hours, we were like we were joking, we were celebrating, we were making fun of people whenever somebody you had that rough call, and so it was like, hey, shake it off, make the next one. And I do think that's one of the things that we get away from in this remote work from home environment is that camaraderie and that buzz that you get on the sales floor when it's really humming and people are picking up the phone and calling people and connecting. There's just kind of an energy about that that's hard to duplicate when you're all just hopping on Zoom or doing it virtually.
I agree with that. I think that also you mentioned something very important. I want you to talk about a little bit more. You were diving in the trenches with your reps. Why do you think most leaders don't do that?
I think, as a frontline sales leader, especially, you've got your 2 constituencies. You've got your people who you're working with, your reps, and then you get sucked into a lot of time with your management and managing up and managing with your leadership team. And I think it's so easy to, hey, let me just pull this other report. Let me chase after this thing in the CRM. And, if I just find the right report and run it the right way, it'll solve everything. And, I'll tell you, I've left jobs because I reached a point where I was like, my day is no longer talking to prospects. It's no longer talking to customers. I'm spending all my time in internal meetings and things like that. And I'm a frontward facing guy. Like I like to be there with my reps. And so I think, trying to balance that as much as possible. And I think it's, show me your calendar and I understand where your priorities are. And so one of the things I do is I've got my calendar color coded so I can see how much time I'm spending on internal meetings and how much time I'm spending on with prospects and customers.
Yeah, no, that's great. And then as you, across the board, the team has grown, you were doing certain things, you've overcome those challenges. What lessons have you learned from that experience that you now have taken into your other leadership roles?
Yeah. I think the first and foremost was, kind of what I told you at the beginning was just openness and transparency that like, I think that's how I was able to get through it, was just kind of being authentic.
Is there such a thing as being too transparent or no? Is that not a thing?
I think there are times where you're like, hey, if I share this bit of data, it might scare people, or like I don't have complete information. So there are times where I'm like, hey, if I'm 90% sure something's going to happen, I probably share it with the team. But if it's like a 30 or 40% possibility, is that worth the uncertainty and doubt it might cause? And so, I try to balance those things. But in general, and this is something I spent 5 years at HelloSign, and it's now part of Dropbox. And one of the things we talked about initially was, being transparent as a leadership team. And then we found out like later on, that wasn't enough because the company grew. We were about 150 people. And so just this idea of transparency wasn't enough. And so we really moved towards active transparency, like trying to proactively share things. Because, early on, if someone had a question like, hey, how much money do they have in the bank? They would go up to Joseph, the CEO, and they could ask. Well, at 150 people, that people are no longer probably comfortable doing that. Like that doesn't happen organically as much. And so we really took strides to ask, hold all hands meetings and proactively address things, because I think that transparency part, in general, I'm like 98% on the transparency, leaning towards active transparency. You hold a couple things behind.
Okay, yeah. So I was like, what does that mean there? Okay, so let's go into, as we wrap up this interview today, we've talked about what you've taken those lessons now moving forward about transparency and leadership, et cetera. I also want to hear from your perspective. I mean, this was a massive challenge to address, letting go of those people as soon as you get into the role, and now you're growing them across the board. What would you say is like been the most impactful thing that you now use in your sales role or sales leadership role from that challenge? Like, we saw the lessons you learned, but what's like been the most impactful thing you're like, wow, like career-wise, personally for me, this is what changed for me too?
Yeah. I think just the idea of a small team, I mean, can accomplish a lot when you've got motivation, clear goals, and you pull together, that there's like an amazing amount that a small group can accomplish. And so it was, so rough going from 13 to 4. But what I was proud of is like what the 4 folks and myself were able to accomplish after that. And just that tight knit, working together, being out on the floor and lifting each other up, and, sharing, like I said, some gallows humor. I mean, at some point, like just kind of the absurdity of it. And so you just kind of embrace that. But I was so impressed with what we were able to accomplish.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for breaking down your story. Not an easy one to overcome, but you did. And as we wrap up here, any lasting shout outs or mentions you want to have before we wrap up?
Well, hey, man, thank you to you for having me on. Always great reconnecting with you. And I would just say, to everyone out there, sales, there are ups and downs. And so for the leaders, I think just being real and authentic with people, and the people who are in the trenches, just knowing that, day to day, hey, they're the ups and downs, but sales can be such a rewarding profession, and stay after it, stay positive, and go out there and be great.
That wraps up another episode of the On the Record podcast with Brian. And we just went through an entire journey of things that you need to be doing and how you can capitalize during a time where things are looking really bad, because obviously we forgot. So I have my notes here. I'm going to read this out to y'all. So number 1 is open communication is crucial during challenging times, right? When you are communicating what's happening, it leads to people being more stressed and they just overthink it. So you want to make sure that you're over communicating and letting them know exactly what's going on. Number 2 is a small motivated team can achieve remarkable results. Just because you don't have a large team that could seem to do a lot, you really want to focus on how do we condense this down and get the most out of it across the board. So that was really fascinating to me. Another thing I saw is being in the trenches builds stronger bonds. So not just saying, hey guys, go figure it out, hopefully it goes well. No, like Brian was in the trenches with them, and it shows that if you are struggling right now with your team or you have layoffs, get in the trenches with them and show them that you care about it, right? Because the more that you care, the more that they'll care about the whole entire scenario that you're in. So hopefully, again, you found this podcast episode to be helpful, and we'll see you on the next one.